Hi, remember my second channel? I'm currently uploading there a lot more frequently now, so if you are interested, consider subscribing. Link is always in the description. I greatly appreciate it. So I believe at the beginning of last year, there was an interview with Akatami, who's the author of Jujutsu Kaisen, and there was a lot of great questions asked, but one that really stuck out for me was Kaisen's reception at the beginning. Supposedly, it wasn't that good, and it was actually on the verge of being axed or cancelled, which, when you look at Weekly Shonen Jump in their magazine, is a very normal thing. It is a heavily competitive and sometimes even cannibalistic magazine. So Kaisen wasn't doing all too well. And because of this, Akatami had a backup plan, just in case, to potentially end the story if it were to be cancelled, and this would revolve around Yuji staying dead. Do you remember right at the beginning of Kaisen when Sukuna takes over Yuji's body, rips out his heart, and threatens to not heal him? This was completely constructed to take hold of the idea, if needed, of that backup plan. That if the story were to fail, if it was not successful, if it didn't gain traction, Yuji would die here, he would stay dead, and our main character would be non-existent. Thus we would have to shift over to someone else. I assume this is a pretty normal thing for a lot of authors within Weekly Shonen Jump, to have some sort of backup plan or some sort of ending plan in place that you can produce rather quickly within a very small amount of chapters, because obviously they don't have a lot of time to build up some sort of jarring ending. And I seen some offhanded comments on Twitter that sparked an idea, a pretty simple one, but one that I thought was rather interesting. If Akatami went through and actually killed off Yuji within Kaisen, where would our story be? Where would our main character be? Who would it be specifically? Would we jump over to Megumi, Nobara, Yuta, maybe a mix of all of them, maybe someone else entirely? How would we handle Sukuna? There's a lot of different questions that come into play and a lot of different answers that you can go with. Just know before that, I love Yuji. I think he's a great main character. He's handled with a lot of care, a lot of emotion, and a lot of finesse. He isn't the most obnoxious individual. He doesn't stand out all too much, but he's handled with care. And I think that's what I appreciate about him the most. Whereas other characters will easily overtower him in flashiness, in chaoticness, in showing off in some sort of aspect. When it comes to pure emotion, when it comes to growth, when it comes to finding one's identity, Yuji feels very personal, feels very grounded, and that's what I love about him. To me personally, within Kaisen, he's irreplaceable. And another character wouldn't have that finding of one's identity and that personal attachment other than him. However, in this hypothetical what-if instance, there's a lot of differing directions that we could go on with the story to create something else. I think the first biggest options that directly kind of fall into your lap is Megumi. Megumi would be a very interesting main character to handle because he too is not the flashiest of individuals. He doesn't stand out all too much, so we would have to direct him to something very personal as well. And a way to do this is to play upon the stuff that he actually already has, which would be his sister, his family relations, and extrapolating that further, as well as his connection to the Zenin family. You would have to direct so much more story emphasis into these notes to fuel his character a lot more, to play it off in a more personal main character role. To me, that would be the most enjoyable way. He also self-learns very quickly, so a lot of the fights that he would get in throughout the narrative would most likely turn out extremely differently, as his steps towards growth, towards development, towards change or evolution would be rather drastic because of how much self-learning he does. On the other hand, you also have someone like Nobara, who I think would be a beautiful choice for something that is a little bit different, something that feels unique within Weekly Shonen Jump. This is a magazine that is dominated with teenage male main characters, so to have a woman in this place thriving and growing and competing with every other cast member, I think would be exceptional. I think it'd feel very refreshing for people coming into the industry or trying to read Weekly Shonen Jump stories that our main character is a thriving woman, extremely independent, that grows rapidly and mentally is evolving to be accustomed to the burden of what the story is putting onto them, how much weight is put onto their shoulders. And there's a lot more stuff that you could give Nobara when it comes to her family past and her friendship and the town that she comes from and the burden or the weight that was put on her shoulders back then. So you could actually bring a lot of parallels to her character, which I think would be very beautiful, very saddening, rather symbolic, but also empowering. That's one of the greatest things about Nobara as an individual, is that not only does she empower herself, but it has this alluring ripple effect where it aids other people as well, where they can empower themselves as well by being in the vicinity of Nobara. It's intoxicating in a sense. It isn't sexualized, it isn't pushed down a direction that feels redundant or unimportant, or even tropey or unoriginal. So Megumi or Nobara, both of them would work work. They have a lot of backing for them. Who else is there, right? Well, you could probably do Yuta, but you'd have a very hard time doing him because he's extremely powerful. You would have to shift the story in its entirety for Yuta to work. You'd have to nerf him completely or change a lot of power aspects that the story has built. It could definitely work, but it'd be a lot more difficult. Same can be said for Gojo and him being a little bit older, but I think a story that focuses on Gojo when he was younger with Geto and the origin of them would be very interesting. A spin-off story. We've had it as a flashback, but what if that was extrapolated further into its own fleshed out novel or full-length story? Seeing how Gojo came into the world, how he was treated by his family, how he was raised, and how the school dotted over him, leading all that up to Geto and Toji and the awakening of all of his abilities and his pillar of power that he would become. Difficult as well, but a completely different direction. There is one character, however, one that I think would be not only unique, enjoyable, refreshing, but also shares similarities to Yuji himself, and I think would be absolutely perfect for the role. Maki. I don't think it should be a surprise to a lot of you that I absolutely adore Maki through and through. I think her character growth, the experiences, the mental, emotional, and physical trauma, but also evolution, its shift, its change in dynamic is so incredibly enjoyable. It's one of the most alluring things about her character within Kaisen. And if you were to spread this out over the entirety of the story, after Yuji's death right at the beginning and her coming back in as somewhat of a main character, I think you would have a seamless transition. Not only are Yuji and Maki very similar in terms of their abilities, both of them can't really use cursed energy all too well, but are very proficient fighters. They excel on their own, they can survive, and most importantly, they can evolve. So take what we know about Maki now and what she actually turns into and spread it out. Think about how much more of a story we could get out of Maki from her past and Mai specifically. We could focus so much more on her trauma, her upbringing, the Zenin family, the complexity of it, but also the brutality of it. To me, this would be a brilliant way to introduce the disgusting nature of the families themselves and how the Zenin family is so severely outdated. They treat women horrendously. They have no respect for them. They have no respect for anyone that goes against their beliefs. All they want to do is to create powerful individuals that are usually male. Even if their daughters become extremely powerful, they will not respect them in the same light as the male counterparts. This is inherently problematic, especially with where Jujutsu Kaisen takes place, with how the other families operate and how the school operates. They endorse this, they indulge within this. There's political problems within Kaisen that doesn't really get played upon all too often, but you know is rather there and you know is a glaring issue. Maki would be a great interpretation of it, a great place to rip it all apart and to destroy those old foundations and to uproot it in its entirety, to give birth to something new. This is exactly what she does in the story. So imagine if you played upon it a whole lot more. Imagine if you played upon it for the past 100 odd chapters. You gave more emphasis and time to her relationship with Mai, her sister. Throw in a lot of flashbacks to her upbringing and how traumatizing and unhealthy it was, the abuse that both of them would go through, the guilt that they both face. The buildup of this inner hatred would start to grow more and more. And this is where you would start to see her shift in ability. She wouldn't awaken a curse technique. She wouldn't suddenly get abilities, but she could become deadly fierce with the tools that she is using. The special grade tools, for example, that she could easily operate and cooperate with many powerful people. For me, this is where you would start to trickle in the idea that humans can evolve to something else entirely, that the heavenly restriction can be absorbed or broken or manipulated in some way to give it a new meaning, to give rise to something else entirely, which Toji would be the best example. And because this takes place right before Shibuya, our thought process for a main character looking at Toji and thinking Maki is very, very similar to that. Obviously rearranging a lot of the situation, you could see her win a lot in Shibuya, but taking very massive injuries and potentially even losing some situations, knowing that she has to get stronger, knowing that something has to change, and then the altercation with her family happens. And that that is when you would give birth to the new Maki that would come through, slaughtering the family that abused her, that traumatized her, that said that she would never be anything, to now being one of the most scariest and powerful individuals within the story in her own way, in her own merit. This sounds easier said than done, but to me, I would love this in its entirety. I absolutely adore Maki as an individual. I think she's a brilliant character. The most difficult thing I believe would be creating a rivalry with Mahito, obviously to resemble Yuji and Mahito's rivalry. I think the one way you could do this is have Sukuna be an independent individual, someone that's not fully created but seeking someone that could create a body. So he's not inside of Maki, he's not inside of Megumi or anyone else, but curses know that Sukuna is here somewhere and that they have to build a body for him. They have to find someone or something that can do it, and Mahito would probably be the best individual to be able to do that. Obviously there's stipulations there, but this would give us a reason to run after Mahito, to fight him, to continue to pursue him in a direction if he is the person that is manipulating and learning and growing himself so he can create some sort of vessel for Sukuna. We obviously need to take out Mahito, and Mahito being the charismatic person that he is, I think he would indulge in the idea rather rapidly, and you would have this very interesting and unique clash with Maki and Mahito. To bring this to an end, because I feel like I could ramble on for a very long time trying to build some hypothetical story, the idea that Yuji was going to die at the beginning is very interesting if Kaisen wasn't successful, and the what if variation of who would become the main character is a fun thing to think about. Personally, for me, I would love to see Maki fill that role. I think she would do it brilliantly, perfectly, beautifully. Obviously I'm extremely biased because I absolutely love her character, but I think she fits the role rather well, and you wouldn't have to change a whole lot to make it manageable, to make it possible. Obviously, of course, we'd have to shift things around, and this is kind of more of a perfect scenario situation, but I would love to see her past, her upbringing, her family treatment, and her relationship with Mai and her own identity and all of the complexities that come with it, just evolving and changing and shifting into something else entirely, just being this beautiful evolution and growth to the character that we know she becomes when she slaughters the Zenin family, the culmination of all of this painstaking trauma and past resulting in the action that she took. As her being the main character, you probably would feel conflicted to support her, and that'd be great for Akatami to play upon, but you can't help but feel like you have to support her, that she was right, that she was justified, that the way the family was going and what they were imposing and what they were doing was not okay, was monstrous, was disgusting, and she brought an end to it all, fueling all of that hatred, that revenge, that volatile nature that was brought onto her. There's so many ways that you could change the story, but for me, this one would probably be the most interesting for the most part, as I love the idea of Maki being a main character herself. I think she's wonderful. Endtime. So with that, welcome to the end of the video. If you have made it this far, thank you. I appreciate you. If you had to have a main character for Kaisen that isn't Yuji Itadori, who would you want it to be? There's a lot of different opportunities, there's a lot of different people that you could pick from, and there's a lot of different ways the story could evolve over time. So if you've ever had this thought, or maybe even this exact same conversation or a what if scenario, let me know in the comment section below on who you'd pick. But with that, I want to thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Leave a like and subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. Drink plenty of water, and I will see you within the next one. Goodbye.